Okay, so Stephen Secon, Westchester architect extraordinaire. I think I'd like to start by asking you how long you have been in the architecture profession.
About 30 years.
Since high school.
Coming out of high school, unfortunately, my dad was an interior designer and furniture designer, and I grew up doing summer work, drafting for him, measuring, doing the work, emptying the garbage cans, sorting through all the stuff that no one else wanted to.
That's great. And you also, I think prior to being in architecture, or maybe along with it at some point, you were also a code inspector for the municipality?
Yeah, there was a while in the early 2000s when work was a little slow. I was working as a consultant building inspector for the village of Tuxedo, New York, and that was very interesting being on the other side of the counter, hearing everybody's tales of woe.
I imagine that it's a pretty unique experience. I got to tell you, Tuxedo, New York's one hell of a place to be able to do that sort of work.
Yeah, there are a number of big shots there, a lot of recognizable names, DuPonts and Lorillards, Whoopi Goldberg.
Whoopi Goldberg, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people who didn't like to hear the word no. And it was quite interesting.
Gotcha. Now your applications are kind of multifaceted. You do residential. I believe the last time we spoke, you said you also do commercial, and you also help with legalizations, which I suppose if I were an architect would not be my favorite thing because I would want to like build something really groovy and not just help somebody legalize their deck. But give me kind of an overview of what encompasses your practice.
Well, if I look through like my journal and day book, I have about anywhere between 10 and 15 jobs going on at any one time. And they're all in different phases of completion or construction or design or approval. And they range from legalizations, just like you mentioned, to historic facade renovation in New York City on Lower Broadway, to dentist office in Rye, New York, to a fairly large landscaping design up in New Canaan, Connecticut. So we have a pretty good diversity of projects, and that keeps it interesting and fun and learning for many years.
So you do work in Connecticut as well.
I do some work in Connecticut. Um, I live in Rye, and my office is over in Dobbs Ferry. So probably the geographical center of my sweet spot is White Plains. If you swing maybe a 20-mile radius around there, that encompasses 90% of my catchment area.
Okay, gotcha. Who are your best sources of referrals?
Happy customers. They become my evangelists, and frankly, that's maybe why I've been a little bit lax in advertising because I've been fairly fortunate in having happy customers, ones who will advocate for me and spread the word. Um, but as I'd like to grow the business a little bit, I realize I have to be a little bit more proactive, and I'm happy to be doing a hangout, with you, and happy to explore different avenues to meet more people.
Well, I got to tell you, if someone were to search Westchester architect on Google, um, videos rank very highly. So in my view, having getting found this way, but also having the content that you're offering are two valuable things for someone. Because I think when we had an edition in 2003 on my old house in Ossining, and we interviewed several architects. The one we ended up doing business with and this is not going to come as a shock to you, was the guy that built the edition, that designed the edition for my father. So when you say happy past customers, you're correct. I never knew what kind of a job he did for my father, but I figured he knew the house better than anybody else, and that's how he ended up getting the job. But there was really no Google to speak of back then, other than just like, online directories for local stuff. There were no ratings. There was no Yelp. There were really no niche blogs for any particular industry. The first real estate blog, as a matter of fact, that I ever ran across was on the, I think started about 2005. And I started to do it in 2009. Which brings me to your blog. You make some posts fairly periodically about your own work. Please tell us a little bit about your website, where it can be found, and what people can find on there.
Well, my blog really started from looking at my outbox and my emails, as well as responding to repeated questions that customers seem to have in common, whether it was a small job or a big job. And, in one sense, maybe it's a little bit of a lazy man's approach to say, you can check out my blog, because I've covered this topic. You may find it a little bit more comprehensive than just a phone discussion. But by the same token, I think sometimes it's nice to respond, in an email with a link, and that sometimes, promotes them browsing through your blog and finding other questions or answers to questions they didn't even know that they had.
Right. I don't think it's lazy, by the way. I think it's smart. I think it leverages past work. We've often used the very same idea in our blog work, is using our outbox. Obviously you don't say intensely personal things or name names or anything like that, but general principles, advice, cautionary tales, 5 things you need to know, 3 things to avoid. That's all the sort of thing that is tremendous blog content.
Right, and sometimes it's very general, and then sometimes it's very specific and responsive. For instance, after Hurricane Sandy, there was a tremendous amount. You got to grab that?
No, I should have set it to stun.
So, a lot of the next few blogs after Hurricane Sandy, I tried to deal with things that are about repairs, about dealing with municipalities in emergency situations, and also things that were related, such as climate change and the way that we have to deal with climate change that's not even covered in the codes right now, because many customers believe that code is something that you have to satisfy as a maximum, where really codes are just a minimum that you have to comply with. And as really the climate has changed, municipalities have not caught up to the fact that we're way behind in regulations. And just as a for instance, many towns have what they call surface water control requirements, meaning how you handle rainfall. Right. And many towns require you to hold the water from what they call a 25-year storm, which in our area is, I think it's 5.7 inches over 24 hours. That's kind of an arbitrary number, but that's what they figure. But the reality is we've had 25-year storms almost every year for the last 5 years.
True.
So why not over-design it slightly, because the cost is very, very little additional. And then you have the right system for when you have a really bad storm. I mean, that's my outlook.
Okay, good example. And you've also got, if I'm not mistaken, quite a bit of pictures on your website as well, and on your blog content. Am I correct?
I do. I mean, we're in a visual profession.
Right.
I think, it's just easier sometimes for people to see it and react than to read about it, and then, their eyes glaze over and they don't know what you mean.
Okay.
So, I think a few pictures goes far.
Pictures are another thing that index very well on Google. Um, where would someone find your website? What's the web address?
It's seconarchitect.com. My last name is spelled Secon, then architect.com.
Okay.
There's a how-to and blog section in the website that I try to update every other week.
Okay. What I'll also do, I ought to be able to annotate this video to so that people can see it in the underneath you after you give that, so that people can actually see the address in writing. I'll be able to do that later. All right. Can you give us any idea about some of what your more favorite kind of work is to do?
Well, one really interesting job that I had last year was for New York City Department of Parks. Along the Hudson River, there's a fairly long esplanade, and between 60th Street and 90th Street, I helped design the sculpture installation for 8 different artists, and some of the installations were actually quite complicated. Some of them were related to objects that looked like flying fish, but quite large, 7 or 8 feet wide, made of metal, and had actually pretty sophisticated engineering in attaching them to different piers and docks, and working with the artists to make sure that the actual accompaniment and the way that the art was placed captured it in a flattering way. That was very interesting. And I like the diversity of work. I also like residential work. One of the things that I find actually the most fun is when customers have a really limited budget and really lofty ambitions, because you can't always just throw money at it and get great results. You have to be a little bit more clever. And I find that fun, trying to make people's dollars go further.
Now, I got to tell you, that really resonates with me, and I'll tell you why. When we built our addition, and this is the only other time I've worked with an architect, when we built our addition, it was very simple. It was a box. It was the rebuilding of a garage with a room above it. And I was kind of amazed. I didn't even think, why do you even need an architect? Because it's a box. This is how people think.
Sure.
It didn't dawn on me that the architect's job is not just to draw 4 corners. The architect's job is to figure out how we're going to get electricity and heat to this thing. The architect's job is to figure out where the electrical outlets go, and also to figure out what kind of French doors we're going to put going out the back of the garage if we want French doors, and if we're going to spend $2,500 on French doors, or if we're going to get something less expensive. The architect has an enormous amount of their fingerprint on the budget.
That's true, and I try to be aware of that, and I try to really work within people's budget, and I try, if things, what we call the scope of the job, really exceeds the budget, I try to work with the customer to vet out what things are most important, what things are least important, so that there's no surprises when we're getting bids back.
Gotcha.
We tried to make sure what the drawings we're sending out, will meet the budget when the bids come back, and that no one's disappointed. I'm sorry.
So you work with people. I mean, that's the bottom line. You got to listen to them and figure out how to best suit their needs.
Yeah, it's an interesting place strategically. One is, like you're saying, because some customers really see us almost as plumbers with a T-square. They just see it. You're drawing, you make the plans, you give them to the town, or you give them to the builder, and away you go. But in reality, we like to design. We like to make it buildable and feasible, and we also we can play an important part in the negotiation process with builders, because builders know typically that we do have other jobs going on, and if they want to stay on our call list, they better do a good job, and we try to leverage that to full benefit of our customers. So typically we can negotiate fairly hard and get better pricing with the builder than an owner can directly with the builder.
Well, I would imagine that knowledge is leverage, and you possess the knowledge.
Sometimes, most of the time.
Sometimes. Well, you're very humble. Going to be a long question, but it's going to have a point. We live in a society that would rather ask for forgiveness than permission, and I think you know where I'm going with this.
Sure.
Why is it important for someone to have an architect help them with things like finishing the basement and adding a bathroom and adding a deck prior to doing all that work, rather than years later bringing an architect in to kind of clean it up so that they can sell it and clear their title and get COs for all that stuff?
Well, the short answer is human behavior.
Right.
People typically choose the path of least resistance, and they know that when you're sending drawings to a building department for review, or an architectural review board, a planning board, a zoning board, and ultimately getting it built, it takes a while. It's really simple, and a lot of people just want to bypass that step simply because it takes time and it costs money, and it sometimes can expose them to other issues that they may or may not know about their house or property or building. So, the cautionary tale in this is that you're going to have to deal with it sometime. And if you want to put it off and, like you're saying, ask for forgiveness later, you can, except that the consequences are often quite severe. And the consequences typically come at a very inopportune time. Many times when you're trying to buy another property, you need to sell the first property. If that first property has encumbrances on it, well, guess what? You're not going to be able to sell it. It's quite clear. I mean, there's a reason most municipalities put their assessor next to the building department, because they share a lot of information. And you don't forget that houses, buildings, properties generate a lot of municipalities' income. It's the taxes.
Yeah.
People, frequently want to dodge their tax obligation by not fessing up to what they're doing. But municipalities have also gotten smart. For instance, in New York City, whenever a dumpster is issued or placed, that's controlled by the Department of Taxation. When the Department of Taxation issues the sticker for the dumpster, they correlate their issuance of the dumpster sticker with the building department. When the building department has no permit issued for that property, it's a red flag. They automatically send an inspector, because you might be cleaning out Aunt Mary's attic, but more likely you're not. More than likely you're doing work on the sly, and you're going to get a visit from the inspector.
Well, let me address that, because one of the things, and you're 100% correct, as a broker, I have had deals die because we got to the 11th hour, and only then do we find out that the addition, the bathroom, the deck, the finished basement was not legal. Right. And you can't legalize it by making a few phone calls. So there you go. You jeopardize and often kill a deal, your own sale, which the past 5 years, if you can sell your place, you're lucky.
Right.
And your own purchase, sorry, okay? And the reason people have done this most times is because they have this morbid fear that if they report any work whatsoever to their municipality, that suddenly their taxes are going to get jacked up sky high. And I'll be the first to admit, municipalities are opportunistic. But I think the bark is worse than its bite when you're talking about adding a bathroom or a deck. I don't believe that a deck is going to triple your taxes. It's not going to make your taxes go up so egregiously. I mean, there might be like a little bit of a small increment, but I think it borders almost on paranoia, which only ends up biting them in the rear end later on.
Absolutely accurate. I mean, when customers come to me, one of the things they frequently ask in that regard with taxes is, what is this going to increase my taxes by? I mean, is there some kind of ratio for improvements and so forth? And a couple of assessors have kind of off the record hinted to me that in most parts of Westchester, for $100,000 worth of improvement, your annual property taxes are probably going to increase between $2,000 to $2,500 per year.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to remember also from the municipality's point of view, your property is worth more. And they should be taxing you because your property is worth more. Not that you want to pay it, but there is some obligation that you have.
It's a little bit of paying your fair share. I think it's funny, if somebody does $100,000 worth of work, it's really hard to hide. What amuses me is when somebody puts in for example, a bathroom, which would probably add, maybe $7,500 to $10,000 worth of value to the property, which is like maybe another, if we go by the same fractions, $200 or $300 a year to the taxes, maybe a little bit more. But if you're raising your assessed value by perhaps $10,000, just pay the piper. I mean, that's just my attitude. It just makes life easier.
Right, but like you're saying, a lot of it's fear, and a lot of the fear is driven by ignorance. There's nothing. I've also gone to plenty of assessors with very preliminary drawings, sketches really, and I've talked to them, and I won't necessarily show the address or the person's name, but I was saying, look, this is a 2-story rear addition, in this general neighborhood. If I was advising my customer, what would be your guess to the tax implications? And they're happy to look at it. And you know what? Then you go in with your eyes wide open, and you know what you're dealing with. And there's a long-range plan you may have also, and a short-range plan. You may only be planning to be there a couple more years, get your kids through some good school system, and you move on. And you may be really selling yourself short, by not doing the improvement and living in substandard conditions, or not being able to accommodate guests, or not having a home office, or whatever the situation is.
That's actually an interesting point, and we seldom bring it up, but safety is kind of a huge consideration. And anything that involves, especially electricity, but plumbing, or anything that could cause a fire hazard, it's funny. We talk to people, and everybody lives in the best school district, or the third best school district in New York State. I've been to the the third best school district in New York State in about 40 school districts, right? But the other thing is that their uncle, who's the general contractor that did all the work, did everything up to code. He does everything by the book. Well, if he did everything by the book, why didn't he tell you to call an architect to design all this before he did everything by the book?
Right.
And lots of times, he didn't do everything by the book. I see double-tapped electricity. I see all kinds of just crazy, dumb, do-it-yourself, weekend warrior shortcuts that do cause safety issues. And I think a lot of the reasons, the whole reason for having code is to make sure people live in housing that's habitable and doesn't kill them.
Right. Again, codes are minimums. And unfortunately, in our cynical society, every time a code update or revision comes in, everyone sort of snarkily says, well, I wonder who died, to change this. But unfortunately, sometimes it really takes a tragedy, i.e. Amanda's Law, to initiate a change in the code that is really common sense anyway.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, Amanda's Law was the carbon monoxide detector on all floors, but that poor child that died, I think, outside Buffalo when they had a
Right.
sleepover.
Right.
Yeah, I remember that. I blogged about that. That was really sad. But even in our own backyard, we've seen instances where there have been 20, 30 people on a deck in a backyard, and it collapsed, and there were injuries. People breaking legs and backs. How would you like to go to a barbecue and end up being a paraplegic? Not fun.
No, it's terrible. I've worked on two full house restorations that were caused by fire. One in Hastings, that was an electrical cord that was basically old and frayed, and another one of unspecified origin. But I can tell you one thing, without a doubt: neither owner planned on having a fire. And the reason that these codes are there is life safety. It's not really to make the window manufacturers make bigger windows, but the reason they have a code for a window that's in a bedroom is so A, you can get out, and B, firefighters can come in.
Get in, yeah.
And it's important. Many customers, when we do work in the basements, I look around and I say, unfortunately, listen, there's not two ways out. And the homeowner usually says, well, we're seldom down here with a bunch of people. And I said, but you can't plan an emergency. And
I seldom text while I drive.
Bingo.
On to happier things. I'm in our market area, our market footprint. I'm in Western Fairfield County, Westchester County. I'm tooling around with the idea of finding an architect. Okay? You're not a household name yet, but we'd like people to choose you, right? What should the criteria be for a guy looking for an architect? What questions should people ask? What should I look for if I'm Joe homeowner? What should I be looking for in an architect?
I think really an architect's, the reputation is something that's kind of hard to ignore. And the reputation just doesn't come from owners. Because, honestly, a lot of owners don't know the criteria. But talk to some builders. Are the drawings easy to build from?
Mm-hmm.
Is the architect easily accessible? Are they a member of the AIA, the American Institute of Architects?
Okay.
Are there any complaints against them, lawsuits? Is there anything that's, how many projects do they handle at one time? Tell me about, your staffing, about your office. How long does a typical project take? What's the sequence of events? Just to, and partly it's also to use your instincts. If something sounds too good to be true, it's usually not true.
Amen there, brother. And I guess the last thing I guess people would want to know, how are you paid? In other words, American currency, but what are your rates typically? How does one determine what a good rate and a bad rate is for an architect? Is there a going rate?
There are some common rates. Everybody has ultimately all we sell is time and advice.
Right.
And the way people feel comfortable in paying it varies dramatically. Sometimes it's a cultural issue, sometimes it's an experience issue. The basic ways that we're paid are, one is called lump sum, which, like its name sounds, it's a fixed fee. One is called percentage of construction cost. One is called hourly. Another one is called not to exceed. And sometimes there's a variation of all of these. And each one has its pitfalls. Typically, someone will say, well, Steve, I just want a lump sum, because I want to know the fixed cost, because, I'm very budget conscious. Which is fair enough.
Is that like a flat fee kind of?
Right.
Okay.
And I could say, look, listen, it's $5,000 and it's going to be paid in thirds. You know, a third to start, a third when the design's done, and a third upon the delivery of the drawings to the building department. But here's the thing. What if the customer or the municipality doesn't like what you've done? And they make changes and changes. Well, I'm not going to do it at a discount, nor do I expect to, burden the customer with extra charges unnecessarily. So there's a balance that has to happen, and also the range of services that we provide varies from job to job. Sometimes the range of services we provide is simply drawings.
Right.
Sometimes it's drawings and then getting them through the approval process. Sometimes it's drawings, approval process, bidding the job, and overseeing the construction. So it's a different amount of time that's necessary and a different fee that's involved. So, but to answer your question, going back to the typical range of fees, let's say, a regular two-story addition in the back that has a family room below and a master bedroom above, maybe say it's a $200,000 construction, and they want the architect to oversee the construction, the bidding, the approvals, everything. A job like that may go somewhere between 7 to 10% of the construction cost,
okay,
roughly. My hourly fees are approximately $135 an hour for principal's time and $85 an hour for my associate. And administrative time is billed similarly. Some architects are a little higher, some a little lower. I know typically the feedback I get from customers is that I'm in the middle in terms of price, but the services I provide are more on the high comprehensive end. So they feel like they're getting a better value for the dollars.
Right. I think yours is one of the professions where I believe, like mine, like a lot of kind of outcome-based professions, where if people look for the cheapest one, they're probably using the wrong criteria. And I'll give you a good example. I would not want a vasectomy from the cheapest guy, right?
Right.
If I were in, Backwaterville and I ran a stop sign, there's a really funny I Dream of Jeannie episode where, it's kind of a My Cousin Vinny town, and Tony is arrested, and would you want the first lawyer that answers the phone on the first ring, who's so starved for a client that all he can do is watch his phone, or do you want the guy that's busy? All kinds of different, hey buddy, I'll do your taxes for $50. Probably not the guy you want. So I think that there's sort of a proportion that people need to understand, that on something where there's a high dollar amount and a quality control import to the result, that they shouldn't be too nuts about fees. You don't want to overpay for anything, right. But in a field where your professional advice, insight, experience, depth of knowledge can save people a long future of, expenses, probably sweating the fees, you shouldn't just go for the lowest or the cheapest guy.
That's good advice, and like you're hinting at, it's results oriented, and part of the advice and part of the actual value that we bring is leveraging our knowledge for instance, good contractors. Who to use for what job. Tell us some good showrooms to go see tile or appliances or audiovisual equipment or who's the right person to speak to at the building department for my problem with wetlands. We can cut lots of red tape and save lots of time, which is almost more valuable sometimes than the drawings we produce.
There you go. It's your Rolodex, much like mine, has got some very valuable information to it. I guess I'm dating myself by bringing up a Rolodex. But on that note, I'm very glad that you're in my Rolodex. Do you have any final thought you'd like to make? Any other point you'd like to make?
I think, it's one of due diligence and it's one of discipline. I think customers who can take a deep breath and spend the extra 10 or 15% in time really benefit from hiring better architects, hiring better contractors, better real estate agents. It pays to do your homework, and the savings will come at the back end, not necessarily the front end.
Amen, brother. All right, so on that note, we're going to conclude this.
All right.
Once again, if I'm not mistaken, it's Secon Architect, www.seconarchitect.com.
Yep.
And the office phone number is 914-674-2950.
That's right.
Okay, excellent. So you can embed this video when I get it all orchestrated and edited and finalized on your website, on your LinkedIn profile. Use it wherever you want. And that will wrap it up. So I thank you very much, Stephen, and I'm sure that the people watching this will benefit and make better choices for their architect.
Phil, thanks a lot. It was really enjoyable. I learned a lot here too. All right.